everybody. Today we are here for the 43rd Journal Club of the Image Group. And today's articles are interesting because I would like to call it as for haves and for have nots. So we have a journal article, and we know that newly diagnosed patients of multiple myeloma actually are doing very well now, except for those few who relapse very early and in whom we don't find any cure. For a long time, we have also known that circulating tumor cells are a good biomarker. And we have been trying to model it in many ways. And the Journal Club will actually enlighten us on one such model and how they painstakingly, with the kind of technology that is available and the whole genome sequencing, they have been able to bring out. If this works, then of course we can decide how we will continuously improve the treatments for these patients at diagnosis rather than wait for them to relapse and then start intensifying their treatment. The journal scan is even more interesting because it is something for the have nots. And it is a very simple treatment which has been put together by the myeloma group, which is the Asian Myeloma Network. And in a very simple clinical trial, they have done they have treated patients, doubling the progression free survival for relapsed refractory patients by using the drugs that are so easily available. So without taking too much time, let's go on to the first presentation, which is the Journal Club article. And for that, we have our presenter, Dr. Aniket Jagtap from AIIMS, New Delhi. The title of his topic is Circulating Tumor Cells in Myeloma are a compound biomarker for bone marrow, high-risk genomic alterations, and tumor load. Jagtap, you'll get 20 minutes, and that will be followed by a discussion from Dr. Ritu Agarwal and Dr. Raja Pramanik, both from All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Delhi. So the next half an hour is for AIIMS to take over and to go through the model that has been developed, the way that it has been developed, and then we will have time for question answers. Dr. Aniket, you can show your slides and start.
Good evening, respected faculty and my dear colleagues. Myself, Dr. Aniket Jagtap, medical oncology resident at AIIMS New Delhi, under the moderation of Dr. Raja Pramanik sir and Dr. Ritu Gupta ma'am, will be presenting an article published in Blood on 26th of February this year. Circulating tumor cells in myeloma are compound biomarkers for bone marrow high-risk genomic alterations and tumor load. So if we look at conventional risk stratification systems that are being used in myeloma, one thing is they are developed way back before anti-CD30 and bispecific era. Since then, the understanding of genomics and disease behavior has evolved. If we look at changing landscapes, we have moved on from cytogenetics to MRD and now to functional immune genomic risk, which has also been highlighted in recently given IMWG 2025 high-risk multiple myeloma criteria, where they say the risk is continuous, not binary, co-occurrence of lesions worsens with prognosis and allelic burden matters. As highlighted in their criteria, where combinations of genetic abnormality portend higher risk in multiple myeloma. If we look at the background of CTCs, they have been studied in multiple analysis. This one, that is Bertmani et al., said that increased levels of CTC tumor cells at diagnosis are associated with shorter PFS and OS, as seen in these graphs, where there is definite difference in CTC high and low patients for PFS and OS. The CTC cutoff in this study was 0.07% to define CTC high group. The proportion of patients with bone marrow plasma cells more than 60% was approximately twofold higher in CTC high group, and the CTC levels and not the bone marrow plasma cell levels affected the outcome. Therefore, tumor burden is not the sole factor for poor outcomes, but the CTC high levels are. If we look at the characteristics of the CTCs, they are present across the entire disease spectrum and increase in parallel with bone marrow tumor burden during progression. The whole genome sequencing has shown substantial concordance between CTCs and matched bone marrow tumor cells, And transcriptomic analysis also reveals the same, that is transcriptional concordance. Thus, CTC gives us a real-time biomarker which is present at every point in the disease process. So with this background, we asked two questions in this study, which are: is high-risk disease driven by circulating tumor cells, or do high CTC levels simply reflect overall tumor biology? Do CTCs have distinct features compared to bone marrow tumor cells, which might make them a reflection of a disease behavior? Now, what methods or how did they did this in this study? It's bone marrow aspirates and peripheral blood were collected from patients with newly diagnosed multiple myeloma before starting therapy, which were enrolled in Cassiopeia and Perseus trial. The samples were processed within 24 hours, CTC enumerated by next generation flow, and the CTC counts from the COMPASS database were obtained from MMRF website. All of these were then subjected to whole genome, whole exome sequencing, single cell RNA sequencing, and bulk RNA sequencing. The methods used to do this were: the whole exome sequencing was aligned against the reference genome. Mutational signature analysis were performed using multiple myeloma mutational signatures or signature fitting. Apobic mutational signatures. Enrichment of somatic mutations was done with synonymous versus non-synonymous mutations, and copy number variation enrichment and their analysis was done using GISTIC computational analysis. The single cell RNA and bulk RNA sequencing differ in their basic nature, that it is an individual cell versus an aggregate expression of all cells. And the single cell is analyzed with the help of clustering, UMAPs and CNV inference, while bulk RNA sequencing is analyzed using differential expression with volcano plots. Now, if we look at the statistical methods, the non-parametric tests were used to compare the groups with adjustment for multiple testing, that is false discovery rate. Ordinal logistic regression were assessed for association between CTC levels and tumor or genomic features. And at the end, a decision tree model was constructed using a party-kit and tree hit platform to identify key predictors of elevated CTC levels incorporating bone marrow plasma cell burden and genomic alterations. So let's move on to the results. It is divided into 5 parts and we will discuss it one by one. So moving on to first part, which is single cell transcriptomes of bone marrow and circulating myeloma cells. Now here, the single cell RNA sequencing data from 25 patients with newly diagnosed multiple myeloma was collected. There were 15 high CTC and 10 low CTC patients. For 7 of these high CTC patients, peripheral blood samples were available. Now, if we look at the data of these 7 patients in whom the single cell transcriptomics was done. So if we look here, the panel A shows the clusters, which are transcriptionally distinct cell clusters identified from single cell RNA sequencing. If we look at the UMAPs of the patient, same UMAP colored by individual patients demonstrate how cells from different patients distribute across shared or distinct clusters. And if we look at compartment-wise UMAPs, we can see that bone marrow plasma cell and peripheral blood cells of same patients are clustering together. So we get an idea here that CTCs in myeloma are transcriptionally similar to bone marrow tumor cells as they are clustering together, and they represent a disseminating subclone rather than a separate disease entity which is present only in PB blood. Now moving on to the heat map, here we can see the same genes are expressed in bone marrow and peripheral blood cells. When we look at multiple myeloma patient 1, we can see that first bar is composed mainly of bone marrow cells. The second bar from the same patient is composed of peripheral blood. But both of these clusters highlight MAFB, which is highlighted by yellow in the heat map, giving us an idea that the same genes are expressed in bone marrow and peripheral blood. Cytogenetics drive the expression patterns. Now coming back to that same patient, we can see in the third bar, which is a pink colored representative area, which is given as MAF, is expressed in both of them, giving us an idea that the progression or expression is driven by cytogenetics. Moving on to subclone analysis, here each mini plot is equal to one patient. Same subclones exist in bone marrow and peripheral blood. There is no new clone in any of the patient which is in peripheral blood or bone marrow. Some subclones are enriched in peripheral blood, suggesting clonal selection for circulation. Like in patient 2 and patient 3, subclone 1 is majorly present in peripheral blood and in lesser quantity in bone marrow. Thus, they are selected for circulation, which reflects higher invasiveness or more aggressive biology. Coming on to volcano plots, here the paired Shudoubel differential gene expression analysis of bone marrow and CTC samples without any subclones was done, and in the panel G, cleaner comparison of matched malignant clones including subclones was done, thus leading to stronger signals and more differential expression of the genes. The number of genes here expressed is more. From these graphs we can see that most points are clustered near the center, suggesting circulating cells are not distinct transcriptional entity but related to bone marrow cells itself. If we look in detail at the panel G or volcano plot here, we can see that in peripheral blood, few genes are more expressed or highly expressed, which are CRIB1, which is associated with proteasome resistance, angiogenesis related, or oxidative phosphorylation related. Now, these genes are necessary for stress response or metabolic adaptation, thus giving us an idea that in peripheral blood, these circulating tumor cells might be adapted to that environment. If we look at the genes overexpressed in the bone marrow compartment, we see that these genes are more related to bone marrow homing and microenvironment interactions like AREG, ID2 and RRAD, that is Ras-GTPase, which is associated with cell migration. Then moving on, here this is a gene set enrichment analysis plot. It shows which biological pathways are more active in bone marrow and peripheral blood. Only pathways with adjusted p-value or significant p-value are given. We can see that in bone marrow, the p53 hypoxia related pathways are upregulated, while the metabolic adaptation related pathways like adipogenesis, oxidative phosphorylation are more expressed in peripheral blood. Now, to summarize part 1, where they did a single cell transcriptome of bone marrow and circulating multiple myeloma cells, CTCs in myeloma are transcriptionally similar to bone marrow tumor cells. Cytogenetics drive expression patterns, and some subclones are enriched in peripheral blood, suggesting clonal selection for circulation. So, moving on to part 2, which was comparison of bone marrow plasma cells from patients with diverging levels of CTCs. Here they did a single cell RNA sequencing of 10 bone marrow samples of CTC low patients and 15 samples of CTC high patients. If we look here, the UMAP clusters show that cells grouped into clusters, that is 0 to 25, are based on gene expression. Bone marrow myeloma cells show high transcriptional heterogeneity. If we look them as per CTC levels, we see that few clusters are enriched in CTC high, while few clusters are enriched in CTC low, but the placement on UMAP remains the same. If we compare these graphs alongside the patient graphs, that is patient clusters on UMAP, we see that most clusters are patient specific, like the CTC level cluster here is represented by this patient. So the most clusters are patient specific, indicating interpatient transcriptional heterogeneity. If we look at the cytogenetics UMAP, we can see that hyperdiploid related UMAPs are different, MAF related UMAPs are different, and clusters align with cytogenetic subtypes, showing that genomic drivers shape transcriptional programs. So the interpatient heterogeneity and CTC levels are driven by underlying genomic alterations. If we look at this volcano plot from bone marrow plasma cells, we see that in CTC high group, 18 genes are enriched, that is expressed at a more frequency. Now these genes are again related to angiogenesis, tumor progression and metabolism, suggesting in bone marrow itself these might be primed to circulate in CTC high patients, while in CTC low patients again 18 genes were enriched. We will not go into detail in that. If we look at gene set enrichment plot here, we see that the genes which are highly enriched are E2F, MYC, G2M, cholesterol homeostasis, which are related to proliferation, metabolic activation, and stress or immune signaling, thus giving them an edge to persist or increase in number, leading to CTC high. Then bulk RNA sequencing data of bone marrow plasma cells from patients with known CTC levels from MMRF database. Now, why we had to do this? In current study, only 25 patient data was available. The variation can be driven by myeloma initiating event only. To address this bias, we analyzed publicly available bone marrow plasma cell bulk RNA sequencing data with known CTC levels. And it was further adjusted for genetic subtype, thus removing the confounding from cytogenetics. So if we look at this bulk RNA sequencing from the MMRF data, we see that here also there is differential expression of the genes. Even after removing the genetic effects, the differences persist. Therefore, the CTC high biology is not just due to cytogenetics, but it reflects intrinsic tumor behavior and other factors which might be responsible for their differential expression, which we'll come to later. Now, further coming to this Venn diagram, it particularly highlights that most patients fall into one dominant subtype, as the intersections have only 0%. That is, there is no significant interaction between the two pathways. They are largely mutually exclusive. Myeloma is genetically divided into distinct primary subtypes. So to summarize part 2, which was comparison of bone marrow plasma cells from patients with diverging levels of CTC in a cohort of the 25 patients as well as from MMRF dataset, we can say that differential expression of genes is partly driven by primary genetics. Transcriptomic differences vary across subgroups reflecting underlying genomic events, and higher proliferation means increased tumor burden and increased CTC levels. Now moving on to part 3, which is impact of primary and secondary genetic lesions and tumor burden on CTC levels. Here they use single cell RNA sequencing, Erasmus dataset and MMRF dataset to see the effects. Now here in this violin plot, we can see as the CTC levels are increased, there are specific subtypes associated with higher CTC levels. Like MAF subtype is strongly associated with high circulating disease burden as shown by this pink violin plot. Association of genetics with high CTC persists despite or independent of bone marrow tumor burden. Like in this bar diagram, even the bone marrow low patients had higher CTCs which had MAF expression. And in bone marrow high bar graph also the CTC high patients had a MAF expression. Therefore, the MAF is driving the CTC high phenotype here. Moving on to secondary genetic events, here we can see secondary high-risk genomic events like amplification 1q, TP53 loss or deletion 1p. Higher, they are associated with higher CTC levels. Like biallelic loss in TP53 signifies high CTC levels. These alterations are likely linked to tumor dissemination and aggressive biology independent of primary cytogenetic subtype. This is the in this CTC high patients show higher frequency of mutations in key genes, especially TP53 mutations are strongly enriched in CTC high patients as shown in this bar diagram. Now moving on to GISTIC plots, which are genomic identification of significant targets in cancer patients. They give us genome-wide visualizations to identify recurrent copy number alterations in different genes. So here we can see the genes which are amplified or which are deleted and how their copy number variations are different. So the CTC linked CNVs, the CTC high patients show recurrent CNVs. 25 significant loci were enriched in CTC high patients compared to CTC low. There were amplifications of few genes which promote survival and proliferation. There was deletion of few genes which lead to loss of tumor suppressor genes like RB1. Now, summarizing part 3, that is impact of primary and secondary genetic lesions and tumor burden on CTC levels, we can say that association of genetics with high CTC persists independent of bone marrow tumor burden. Secondary high-risk genomic events are significantly associated with high CTC levels, and bone marrow plasma cells in CTC high multiple myeloma are enriched for high-risk secondary genomic alterations, including CNVs and SNVs. Now moving on to part 4, that is association of increased apobic mutational signatures with high CTC levels. Here they used whole exome sequencing from MMRF database. Here we can see as apobic signature increases, the CTC high nature also increases. Therefore, apobic indicates active mutagenesis, genomic instability, and tumor evolution. In this heat map, here we can see that CTC high patients do not always have bone marrow plasma cell burden high. That is here even in CTC high without MAF or CTC low with MAF, the bone marrow plasma cell burden varies. Another point here is CTC high myeloma, especially MAF, is driven by apobic mediated mutagenesis. If we look at the heat signature of apobic, colored as orange and yellow here, CTC high with MAF has a higher signature. CTC low with MAF also has a higher apobic signature. This is regarding apobic infographic, which is an enzyme which leads to DNA mutagenesis. So to summarize part 4, that is association of increased apobic mutational signatures with high CTC levels, we can say that secondary genomic events likely drive increased CTC levels, explaining their strong association with high-risk disease. Now the final part, that is hierarchical drivers of CTC dissemination in multiple myeloma. A decision tree was built using Partikit and plotted with TreeHit platforms, where tumor burden is the strongest driver of high CTC levels, followed by in low tumor burden, CTC levels are driven by genomics, that is MAF, TP53, amplification 1q, and apobic signatures. That is multiple secondary high risk events increase CTC dissemination. In the absence of all these alterations, it is associated with consistently CTC low levels. This model underscores CTC levels as an integrated biomarker capturing both tumor burden and the genomic architecture of high-risk disease in multiple myeloma. Now coming to strengths of this study, it's an integrated multi-omic study across the cohorts. Secondary events have been highlighted to drive high-risk disease, convincing demonstration of apobic mutational signatures, and cross-cohort validation strengthens robustness and generalizability. The limitations are, of course, a small discovery cohort. A single time point analysis limits assessment over a longitudinal period and thus effect on survival outcomes. Lack of comparison with established high-risk frameworks. So in conclusion, the CTCs are a novel, interpretable decision tree model integrating genomic and tumor burden parameters, which offers a pragmatic approach for risk stratification, easily accessible biomarker in peripheral blood predicting the impact of genomic lesions on disease trajectories, and CTC levels rise with both increasing tumor burden and high-risk genomic alterations, jointly driving aggressive disease, requiring larger studies to define their independent prognostic impact. Thank you.
So, may I?
Aniket has, we've lost signal with him, but I think I'll just make one small comment, Ritu. His presentation is excellent. He has actually explained it so well, and it was a tough paper, and he has done real justice to it. I hope he will come back online, but I think Dr. Ritu and Dr. Raja Pramanik can take over and discuss this paper further.
I agree with you, ma'am, and Aniket is back online. And Dr. Aniket, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah. So I would say that we've known for quite some time that CPC, the circulating plasma cells, are a reflection of high tumor burden in myeloma. And it portends a poor outcome because if you look at the plasma cell leukemia, where there are a large number of circulating plasma cells, these patients have a distinct biology as well as a very dismal outcome. And if we look at the space that the cutoff has reduced from 20% to 5%, and even now we have the data that those who have more than 2 or less than 5 behave similar to more than 5. So maybe we are just reducing. So the bottom line is that we do understand that any amount of circulating plasma cells, and as they are increasing, they correlate with survival outcomes. Now, so they're an important biomarker. And if you look at the literature, the recent literature, a recent paper published by the same group in the same journal, same edition, volume. So they had evaluated the patients from Perseus and the Cassiopeia trial. And, they demonstrate in that also that the patients with the high CPC, they fare poorly as compared to those with the low CPC. Now here the question arises, is CPC just a reflection of tumor burden, or these CPC have some unique disease biology? Do they have transcriptionally distinct features, or are they a distinct subset altogether? So I would like to draw your attention to a paper published by Dr. Walker and Morgan in 2017, in Nature Communications, where they nicely show that spatial genomic heterogeneity of plasma cells, in which they sequence using bulk RNA sequencing from different focal lesions. Now, if we put that corollary into this space, then we would tend to think that the CPC may be reflecting a subset, a distinct from the disease in the bone marrow. And that is what was, I think, the starting point for this study, to understand whether the circulating plasma cells are totally a distinct, genomically distinct subset from the bone marrow plasma cell within the same patient. So we're talking here about the intra-patient heterogeneity. And this study has very elegantly addressed this question. The drawback in the 2017 study was they found such a spatial genomic heterogeneity. We have to take into account the fact that that was a bulk RNA sequencing, and a large number of information gets drowned into the sea of that clonal fractions, because the limitation is roughly 20%, which is a very huge number. So the strength of the study is the single cell sequencing data which they used. So as Aniket has very nicely actually summarized each part of the result, but I would say that the bottom line is that we found from this paper that the CPC are transcription within the same patient, they are transcriptionally similar to the bone marrow. And there are very few genes which are different, and they are just reflecting the immediate microenvironment of the cells that they're present in, of the tumor cell that they're present in. In the peripheral blood, they are subjected to a different kind of an environment, and a few genes change. And in the bone marrow, there's a slight difference in the microenvironment, their interaction with the stromal cells. Apart from that, they're basically the same disease biology. The interesting thing which this paper gives us is that high CPC is associated with proliferating gene signatures. And now we have a biologic correlate of tumor burden correlating with the high CPC. So far, we just thought that higher the tumor burden, the more chances that we will get circulating plasma cells and the numbers will be high. But now we have a biological correlate to that, because these patients by default have proliferating gene signatures. That differs slightly in just one or two subcategories like MAF translocations, where despite not having the proliferating signatures, these patients have high CPC. So these are some of the other that brings the context of specific genomic aberrations, which over and above the proliferating or the transcriptomic profiling, the primary and secondary genomic events that are that are regulating the CPCs. So here, another interesting thing that came up is the ApoBec signatures, which are associated with, high risk of having high CPC. So what this paper nicely gives us that CPC is a function of both tumor proliferation and adverse genomics. And if we look at their paper on from the patients with the in the clinical trial patients that I just spoke about, there what they are trying to show is that the higher the CPC, the poor the outcome. The genomic correlates are there. They are comparing the DVRD with the VRD. So there they are showing that DVRD is performing better, those patients are achieving higher MRD negativity even with the high CPC. So maybe CPC will not just remain a prognostic biomarker. There is scope for its role as a predictive biomarker in future. And another thing which Aniket also highlighted, that in future maybe the risk stratification guidelines will include CPC because it is not just reflecting the tumor burden but also reflecting the tumor pathobiology. So that's from my side. Now I invite Dr. Raja to give his comments on the paper.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you, Aniket, for this beautiful presentation. So this was a very interesting work and very complex work with 5 intricate work packages, and Aniket has very nicely dissected all this. So I'll just give my some comments on this. As a clinician, we always need good biomarkers to better stratify disease, and so that we can prognosticate better and manipulate our treatment for the patients. We started with Duri-Salmon, then came ISS, then revised ISS, ISS2, and we realized that this risk is not binary, it's rather additive. The revised IMWG criteria now says FISH plus NGS of TP53, and we are moving towards functional genomic risks. So we are moving toward the functional genomic risk. Now CTC, which patient flow on the peripheral blood, is a more patient-friendly thing than the bone marrow MRD, which is our endpoint and our endpoint today. The modern endpoint is a sustained MRD negativity, which all we envisage in our patients. So for years, we have known that this high CTC count in newly diagnosed patients predict poor outcomes, but we have long debated with these represent a specialized migratory population. So the primary strength or primary message number 1 from this research is that it gives a definitive answer to the question. By single cell transcriptomics and whole genome sequencing, the authors have nicely demonstrated that there is no migratory signature or unique CTC cluster. Rather, these cells simply represent they mirror the marrow pathobiology. The message number 2 is that the CTC levels are a compound biomarker. Rather than being a single metric, it is a composite of 3 things: overall tumor burden, the primary genomic translocation, and the secondary high-risk genomic events. So all 3 combined gives as a compound biomarker, which is the CTC. The third message is that the tumor burden is the most significant driver. Even in the predictive model, tumor load more than 28% BM, that was the strongest predictor of elevated CTC. The message number 4 is that the genomic drivers specifically trigger the egress from bone marrow outside. Certain genetic events drive high CTC levels independent of the tumor burden. Specifically, MAF and the ApoBex signatures, they are strong predictive biomarkers for circulation. Then message number 5 is that proliferation is the uniform mechanism for all these events, and high-risk secondary events are enriched in this high CTC disease. And finally, message 7 is that this CTC can offer us a robust liquid biopsy because they reflect the total impact of high-risk genomic lesions and the proliferative state. So they act as a minimally invasive proxy to have a look at the most aggressive features of the patient's bone marrow. So this is a very easily accessible, minimally invasive liquid biopsy that can capture the impact of high-risk genomics in a patient's disease trajectory. It can be repeated multiple times also, and this is comfortable for the patients. So I think the next step should be to include this CTC as a translational biomarker arm for all the newer studies of multiple myeloma that are the modern day clinical trials. This will validate their value, and then we'll assess their value whether they're comparable to the bone marrow MRD, which is the current standard of care as our primary endpoint of most of our studies. So these are the messages that come out from this paper, and I'm happy that Aniket has very nicely dissected it out well before the audience. Thank you.
So thank you, Ritu and Raja. We have time for questions. I can see Hari is there, Uday is there, and Dr. Pankaj. And I still can't see any questions in the Q&A section. So while questions come in from the audience, I think if Uday, Pankaj, or Hari have questions, please go ahead.
So, ma'am, being the youngest, can I start off?
Of course.
Ma'am. So, ma'am, so Ritu ma'am and Dr. Raja. So the thing is, all good what you said, but let me act as a base. So first thing, they have evaluated 25 NDMM patients with 7 paired bone marrow and peripheral blood samples. Don't we think that this will limit the statistical power? Aren't we over-interpreting it? So conceptually, wonderful, but I think it's over amplification of a small data set being done to talk too much about it. So that's number one. Number two, this is a trial-based cohort. The samples are from Cassiopeia and Perseus trials. Now, as we all understand, generally the trials exclude frail patients and socioeconomically diverse patients. So the question comes in, does this really apply to the real world? The third concept or the problem which I feel is a functional validation. The study infers the mechanism that proliferation is equal to CTC shedding. And thus, you take out this CTC and use it as an overall biomarker. But they haven't ever spoken about experimentally testing them or following these patients prospectively to say that this particular CTC, which is being now shown as a global biomarker, is affecting the final outcomes of the patients. So considering these factors and also looking at the papers published from AIIMS itself, with the type of genomic sequencing that we have with high prevalence of 1q gain, the TP53 abnormalities that we have. So are we the same population? Yeah, is our genetic background suit those there? So these are few queries that I have. So, but I feel that yes, it's a good concept, but it's way away. We are like far behind from applying it on a day-to-day basis.
So I'll take the first question first. The small patient numbers, which you said, yes, agreed. And that is one of, so with the small patient numbers, whatever they inferred, they went back and looked at the MMRF data set because they also agree that this is a small number. So you're right on the dot regarding that. As far as single cell sequencing paired samples is concerned, so I would rather add to your discourse is that the paired samples were only for those who had high CTC, because obviously if you have lower CTC, it's very difficult to collect as many number of cells from the peripheral blood. It becomes challenging. So that is certainly a drawback, but when we are doing, and the drawback is not in the terms of not the, in single cell, you're just counting the number of cells. It's not the number of patients. But for us, number of patients become relevant, and your question is, your concern is relevant because myeloma is transcriptionally very heterogeneous. So they the number 7 in this group does not cover the entire heterogeneity of myeloma. So there, yes, the number is less, and that is why they went on to the MMRF dataset and the Erasmus dataset. So regarding the functional validation, yes, but if you see the linked paper with this, where they have looked at the Cassiopeia and Perseus trial patients, they have correlated the levels of CPC with treatment outcomes. So there, that kind of functional validation is there. Not only in this study, that kind of validation is available in many other studies as well. So regarding the trial patients, I'll refer the question to Dr. Raja. The second question regarding the trial patients.
I completely agree with both of you. So the methodological rigor of this paper, you said the discovery cohort was small, but they used the MMRF CoMpass big data set to validate their in-house findings. So that becomes a bit robust. And then is it applicable to universally to all the patients? So whenever a biomarker is discovered, it's actually discovered during the clinical trials as a translational arm of the trials only. And then it is validated, whatever be the companion diagnostics and the PDL1 assay, everything developed like that only. That's what I mentioned, that these need functional validation. So the next step should be that the major clinical trials which are coming up, with MRD as the endpoint. Now it's an endpoint as per the ODAC definition. These are the endpoints. This should be added as an additional arm, translation arm of each of these studies so that it is also validated. And once we have robust data regarding that they are actually surrogates of PFS, OS, as is our MRD, bone marrow MRD, then we are that is ready for prime time in clinical practice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So
Thank you,
yes,
ma'am, and thank you,
it's
Raja.
not ready for real world for certain, but it is a good concept and it kind of, puts you to a lot of more work to be done before it actually comes into the clinics. And I think prospectively, if these patients are followed up and we have more information on them, then it will stand the test of times. Yes, Hari, you are ready with the question?
No, it's more of a comment, and I think the whole study is more of a validation of what we always had a clue about in terms of having poorer outcomes for patients who had circulating tumor cells or, for that matter, circulating plasma cells. And very simplistically, for me, if I were to encounter plasma cells, to me, I just feel that the malignancy I mean, the bone marrow has lost control over the malignancy, and it is quite independent of the bone marrow, which is a primary disease from where it evolves. So for me, and also we have always, it is just also a validation that when we are looking at the circulating tumor cells and go back to the molecular profile of these patients, we are always seeing that they are associated with adverse profiles. So again, it correlates with the fact that the circulating plasma cells is a poor prognostic feature, irrespective of whatever the kind of adverse profile or favorable profile that the patient has. The other thing is, can this be a new modality independent of MRD that you assess in the bone marrow to predict for outcomes? So we also know that circulating tumor cells, if they are present and if MRD is negative, their outcomes are worse. So they become an independent factor over here. But a lot of work needs to be done. Myeloma is the way that when we're talking about towards cure in myeloma, these are the aspects that come into play for us to be more stringent about defining our criteria for saying what is going to be a cure for myeloma. Certainly a way ahead. And I think if you ask me, the study has thrown no surprises in terms of what we have seen over here, but it is just a validation of what we always thought will be the case.
Yeah. Okay. I think now it's my turn to ask questions. I only have two simple questions. One, Dr. Mithu, why did Aniket, why did they put 0.07 as the cutoff, 0.007% as the cutoff? Is that standardized or it was arbitrary?
So, sir, in the study which they had mentioned, but the first study where we showed PFS and OS difference, they had also correlated the outcomes based on MRD. So what they did was the patients who were CTC high and got MRD negativity were to be seen to be performing well. The patients below or above 0.07 were more potent to be performing bad. So I think from that idea, they have not mentioned some robust cutoff ki why only 0.07, but they gave this as a corollary statement why they took it. Not any definite point, but I think from that statistics they derived this number.
Yes, sir. It is based on the Bertolini paper. It's a Forte trial. They analyzed this and found that the 0.07 was the cutoff of CTCs by NGF, and there's a paper by Chatterjee et al. In 2022, which clearly mentions all the different cutoffs that they have given. So Bertolini et al., based on the Forte trial study, the cutoff of CTC high versus low, that paper showed 0.07%.
Okay, but Dr. Ritu, is it a standardized 0.07 or it is still
So different, if you look at the correlation of CTC with the outcomes, so different papers and different studies have looked at, followed.
normal environment in the bone marrow. So and in myeloma, we know that the microenvironment is very important, which also plays a very important part. So, I mean, the study is elegant, but what I feel is in future, if somebody wants to study, I would also say that please look at the microenvironment, the matrix, and the other things which may be responsible for some of those tumor cells coming to the periphery. And in some patients, even though the disease may be a high risk biology, but these tumor cells may not be coming to the peripheral blood film. So, just to complete the study, I think we need to study the microenvironment, which is responsible for these tumor cells leaving the normal environment and going to the peripheral blood. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for that comment. And I think in that space there is some interest in the addition molecules. In fact, the IKZF mutations which are there, seen here in my space of myeloma also, they've been shown in other tumors to be associated with changes in the addition molecules. So probably you're very right. There are other things which are also playing some role, and some addition molecules are also, because they will be one or two, and maybe they are not, they are getting drowned in that sea of entire such a complex genomic architecture. So that's another angle that people may look at, and that's a very relevant point.
Yes.
So if there still aren't any more questions in the Q&A section, so I think thank you very much, especially to Aniket for an excellent presentation of a very complex paper, and to Ritu and Dr. Raja for all the clarifications that they have given us. Uday, I will hand over to you, and then maybe I will have to take leave a little early today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot for that. Sir, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir. We can just put it full screen, sir.
Yeah. Full screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So, firstly, I would like to thank Dr. Ritu Gupta, ma'am, and Dr. Raja for taking out their time and also discussing the article threadbare and beautifully explaining the concept behind it. So my heartfelt thanks to both of them. And I would want all of you to scan this QR code. Though the quiz is going to take place after 10 minutes from now, we are going to have a general scan before we do the quiz. But in the meantime, all the people can just scan this code so that we don't waste the time then at that particular point of time. So request all of you to just scan this code. And there's no embargo on participation. Faculty, students, residents, everybody can participate. Okay, so with that, I will go further and we go to the next part of the presentation for the day, which is going to be the general scan presentation. And for this general scan, when we started off this whole thing, the whole purpose of the process of going through this was to ensure that more and more students and the junior faculty develop the art of writing and start understanding or interpreting the various published literature. So for which we have been doing it now. This is the 40th time we have been doing this. And these are the various purposes for which we did this. And over a period of time, we have had beautiful write-ups. And lately, even in this time, when the judges had actually perused and given a person the first prize, when we ran through an AI check, now all the entries we are running through an AI check through image, and we found out that the first person had got 92% plagiarism from AI. So we request, the purpose is for you to develop or you to get trained of how to interpret the articles and not the AI modules to develop of how to interpret articles. So don't train them, train yourself. So these are the various variables under which they were analyzed. And I personally would like to thank Reena ma'am and Dr. Lingaraj, who had reviewed all the write-ups or the commentaries which had come in. So thanks to both of them for doing that. And this year, the first prize, actually, she is the second prize winner. The first prize winner we had withdrawn because of high plagiarism content. So the second prize, or the final winner, is Dr. Shilpa Gupta from Bombay Hospital and Holy Spirit Hospital in Mumbai. Heartiest congratulations, Dr. Shilpa, for winning this prize. And I would like to play her presentation. Yep.
Uday sir, we cannot hear the voice.
You cannot hear the voice?
Yes, sir.
Just 1 second. Just give me a second. Can you hear it now?
Still not, sir. If you don't mind, can I play it, sir?
Yeah, you play it over, please. No
Thank you,
problem.
sir.
Good evening, everyone. I'll be presenting this randomized phase 3 study comparing pomalidomide, cyclo, and dexa versus pomalidomide and dexa in relapsed refractory myeloma, published in Blood Cancer Journal on 6th of October 2025, conducted by Asian Myeloma Network. Pomalidomide is already established as an agent along in combination with dexamethasone in relapsed myeloma. Addition of low-dose cyclophosphamide to this immunomodulatory drug can probably have a synergistic effect. And being a low-cost drug, it can have broad accessibility across diverse healthcare settings. There was a phase 2 study which compared PCD and PD, which showed an improvement in the overall response rate and the progression-free survival. It was a randomized 2-arm multi-center multinational study, which was conducted in Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, and Malaysia by the Asian Myeloma Network, and the patients were randomized in 1:1 ratio to receive PCD or PD. Patients who received PD had taken pomalidomide 4 milligrams day 1 to day 21 and dexamethasone 40 milligrams weekly on day 1, 8, 15, and 22. In addition, PCD had cyclophosphamide 400 milligrams on day 1, 8, and 15. The patients were assessed every 28 days. At the end of the treatment, patients were assessed for disease progression. If the patient had disease progression, they were followed up for survival. And if they did not, then they were given another cycle and evaluated every 28 days. Patients who were prior exposed to lenalidomide and proteasome inhibitor were included in this study. Refractoriness was defined as disease progression on treatment within 6 months of the last dose, and relapse was defined according to the IMWG criteria. Adult patients with ECOG status 0 to 2 and maximum 6 prior lines of therapy were included, whereas plasma cell leukemia patients or having prior exposure to pomalidomide were excluded from the study. PFS was the primary endpoint. Overall response rate, overall survival, duration of response, and safety assessment were the secondary endpoints. Genetic evaluation was not available for majority of the patients. Patients were distributed as high risk, about 8 patients in PCD and about 20 patients in PD arm. Cyclophosphamide was given in about half the patients in PCD arm prior exposure and about 19 patients in PD. Almost 1/3 of the patients had received prior autologous transplant. The study required 60 patients to be enrolled in each arm to detect a hazard ratio of 0.5 for PCD over PD. A modified intention to treat analysis was performed. The various statistical methods enlisted here were used for the analysis. The results showed significant PFS benefit of PCD having 10.9 months of PFS and PD of 5.8 with hazard ratio of 0.43 and p-value of less than 0.001. The objective response rate was also significantly better in PCD arm as compared to PD arm, with 17.7% of patients achieving CR or better as compared to 3.3% of patients in PD arm. The overall survival was not statistically significant, but PCD did show a slightly increased overall survival. If we look at the subgroup analysis, the PCD arm showed better in this forest plot. It was better across all the different subgroups, whether they were in the different age groups or different genetic risks, ISS stage, or whether they have received or not received prior transplant. The safety profiles of both the regimens were generally manageable and tolerable. The treatment-related adverse effects were not significantly higher in the PCD arm, whereas grade 3, grade 4 side effects were seen more in PCD arm, but again, they were not statistically significant. Each arm reported 17 deaths. Total of 34 deaths were reported in the study. The neutrophil count was decreased more in the PCD arm, but again, it was not statistically significant. Adverse effects leading to discontinuation was more in the PD arm, and pomalidomide dose modifications were similar in both the arms. Other adverse effects were also matched. This study has few limitations. It does not, high-risk genetic information was not routinely collected at diagnosis or relapse, and it was not even mandated by the study. But the authors conclude that the randomized nature of the study ensures high-risk genetic percentages were balanced. The MRD was not conducted but again, the authors conclude that these patients who are heavily pretreated, achieving an MRD negative response is statistically unlikely with the drugs being studied. So the main takeaway from this trial are that prognosis of relapsed refractory myeloma patients is dismal, with limited access to the novel agents in various parts of the world. Combining third-generation immunomodulatory agents like pomalidomide with conventional treatment may improve PFS as compared to doublet. There was significant clinical improvement was achieved without having an increase in the rate of adverse events. Death was reported in 1/4 of the cohort, which questions the efficacy of PD or PCD in certain subgroups. In current practice, we can see that PCD treatment is feasible, cost-effective option for Asian patients with relapsed refractory myeloma. It is probably best positioned where cost and access constraints preclude newer immunotherapies. Thank you, everyone.
So thanks a lot, Dr. Shilpa. With that, we resume our rest of the presentation for the day. We are going to have a quick quiz and then followed by few announcements on behalf of the image. So can you see my screen? Neera, can we see the
Yes, sir.
screen?
Please go ahead.
Thank you. So I would request all of you to quickly join. And by the time people join, I really want to appreciate this girl, Aditi Raghav. She's an MBBS final year. She has, punctually attended all the image activities in the last 2 years. Wishing you a great success and, career in hematology and then thereafter into myeloma space, Aditi. Then this is also to tell others that, if an MBBS student can sincerely follow it, then for the postgraduates or the DMs to just join the quiz, really, it's not a matter. Yeah, this is acceptable. So you can write any name, anything. That's okay. As long as you identify yourself, if you win the prize, so rest everything is all right. You can join in. You need not write your name. You can join in whichever way. Anonymization is acceptable. We only have 10 people. How many, Nirav, how many have joined the meeting today?
Sir, on the delegates portal, it is 110.
110 people.
Yes.
And we have only 9 people joining the quiz.
Yes, sir.
Okay, without further ado, I will continue with the quiz, and people can join in the middle of the quiz whenever they wish to. Okay, let's start. So for the first question we have, which conceptual model best explain the biological significance of CTCs in multiple myeloma? You have got 4 options. Okay, very good. So this was very beautifully explained by Ritu ma'am and also the presenter. The thing is, CTCs are a composite biomarker integrating the tumor burden and the underlying genomic risk. So that is the right answer, and most of you have got it right. So the MCQs or the questions that we have framed are just to, harp upon the important points or the take-home messages from the article that we have discussed today. Okay, let's get on to the second question. In the context of myeloma biology, which statement best captures the relation between genomic alterations and CTC levels? Wonderful. So most of you have got it absolutely right. Again, this was very clearly explained both by the presenter and by the national experts. So the high genomic lesions tend to increase the CTC levels by driving aggressive tumor biology. Let's get on to the third question. Which conceptual link between tumor proliferation and CTC levels is most consistent with the current understanding? Actually, the proliferation has got no measurable impact on the CTC release. And this was brought out in the article and then thereafter also in the discussion. So we cannot say they are solely by the microenvironment adhesion molecules. That does play a role, but not solely. So when I say CTC levels are determined solely by microenvironment, that's not the right way of looking it forward. Okay, let's go on to the next question. Which statement best reflects the broad theme of subgroup specific differences in the CTC biology? Okay, most of you have got it right. And in fact, the presenter had brought this out in one of his discussions in one of the 5 parts that he has discussed, that the MAF translocation does have a, impact on the CTC CTC expression or the number of CTCs independent of the proliferation. Okay, from a clinical perspective, what is the most appropriate conceptual use of CTC quantification in a newly diagnosed myeloma? So this is based on what Dr. Raja has explained or summarized at the end of it. Wonderful. Most of you have got it right. And we really wanted to harp upon this point that it's not a replacement on today's date for either bone marrow biopsy or for a MRD assessment. It can be a good complement to it. Over a period of time, Dr. Raja has specifically mentioned that this biomarker can take the space over the coming years to replace them. But on today's date, the best statement is they are a dynamic biomarker that reflects the underlying disease aggressiveness and the genomic risk. Wonderful. Now, these are all based on the Journal Club. Let's get on to the Gen Scan article. So till now, these are the winners. So ABC, XYZ, whoever they are, so they have won it. Good. Now let's go ahead. In many Asian countries, the rationale for evaluating regimens like PCD is primarily driven by which broad health system challenge? Wonderful. So in fact, this was brought out as there are two articles. One was written under the guidance of Dr. Pankaj, and then there is another article which has been written by AMN again, wherein they clearly say that it is the out-of-pocket expenditure or the cost-benefit ratio or the cost effectiveness which drives the decisions in this part of the world. Adding cyclophosphamide to pomalidomide dexamethasone is conceptually based on which therapeutic principle? Because in this particular article, they were talking of PD versus PCD. So how does cyclophosphamide addition to PD works? Wonderful. So it enhances the synergy between alkylators and imides. So that is a concept of adding cyclophosphamide to imides. Allowing crossover from PD to PCD in a randomized trial most strongly affects interpretation of which endpoint? It actually helps you in understanding one of this aspect where the bias could be removed by crossover. Wonderful. So the majority have got it right. It's the overall survival. So whenever there is a crossover, the bias of a particular group, irrespective of the randomization, that can be taken off, and that's the closest to the reality. So OS is the one which gets the best reflected, and the bias is taken out when you do a crossover trial. A major reason why trials like AMN 003 are important for Asian populations, and most of you start designing your local trials. What is the reason? Absolutely right. So most of these global trials, they have ethnic and geographic distribution. They hardly take one odd patient from the underrepresented countries or from the third world countries. So the Asian patients representation across all myeloma trials across the world, if you look at, it's the average is around 8%. So that shows that most of these trials that we keep by hearting or taking them as Bible, they are not in true word the gospel truth. So we need to have our own trials to understand that whether these things really apply to our population or not. In lenalidomide exposed or refractory RRMM patients, adding a drug from a different class, example, a PSI, a proteasome inhibitor or a monoclonal antibody to POMDEX is conceptually intended to absolutely all of you have got it correct. So the concept is primarily to overcome the imide resistance through the mechanistic diversification. So that is the reason of adding one of the another class of drug. So with that, we have, okay, Aniket. So anyway, I leave it to, the senior most here is Pankaj sir now. So I leave it to Pankaj sir. The presenter has got the highest marks, but I think we can give it to him. So heartiest congratulations, Aniket, for winning it. What do you say, Pankaj sir?
I think the most important thing is he participated in this, even though people can say he's biased because he was the author or the presenter in the first. So I would leave it to Aniket. I think Aniket would be most happy to give it to Dr. Saurabh Pandey rather than keeping the award to himself.
Sure. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir. So we can give certificates to both of them. Okay, now there are a few quick announcements. So the image is doing a PET CT reporting practices in multiple myeloma. So we are doing a knowledge awareness and practice, a KAP survey to understand that how you people use PET in cases with multiple myeloma. Most of us, emulate the lymphoma knowledge here, and we try to do the same. But we are practical. What we are trying to look at is how does how all of you use PET in myeloma patients. And more than a survey, it's another way of education, wherein by answering the questions, you yourself will realize that how ideally the PET should be utilized. And at the end of it, whoever wants the papers for reference or the updated guidelines, we will be more than happy to share those with you. Now, also coming, yes, sir. Sir, you had to say something, Pankaj sir. So also taking it further, we on 28th May, we are going to have the next journal club, with the journal club article being the distinct trajectory of MRD in translocation 11-14 patients treated with quadruplet therapy. And in the same journal club journal scan, the journal scan article would be frontline systemic treatment outcomes in POEMS syndrome. Now, the coming year, our effort would be Waldenstrom's and POEMS, wherein the PGI Chandigarh has taken the lead and they are collating the data from across the country. So we would want all of you, whoever have got patients with Waldenstrom's or POEMS, to kindly contact for Waldenstrom's with Dr. Charanpreet from PGI, and from POEMS, Dr. Aditya from PGI. They are collating the national data. So by next year's Indian Myeloma Congress meeting, we are going to have the national data on both these aspects. Also, we are going to announce right away for the articles for the month of June. So in June, we are going to concentrate on nutrition in myeloma. So wherein we are going to have the first author of this particular paper, Dr. Urvi Shah, herself going to talk about this particular high fiber plant-based diet in myeloma precursor disorders, and Indians mostly being vegetarians. Let's see, are we more prone or less prone for myeloma? And the Journal Scan article is also a nutrition article, when we are going to talk about the dietary intake and the risk of MGUS. So this is based on the iStop-MM study. So this is going to be the Journal Scan article for June. So we are now announcing it 2 months in advance, so that you can read the article and prepare your commentary and send the commentary to us in time. So with that, I would come to the end of this presentation and hand over the stage to Pankaj sir for his closing remarks.
Thank you, Uday. So I hope whosoever joined enjoyed the journal club, which is again, meant to discuss some topic related to plasma cell dyscrasias, and also to inform the listeners about what IMAGE is doing for the advancement of plasma knowledge in the plasma dyscrasia field. Like Dr. Uday discussed about a PET CT scan survey for this, and he showed the QR code. And in case somebody had missed that, so they can always email the secretary at the imagesociety.co.in to get these information. I think this link should also be available on the IMAGE website. That is one. And the second, as Colonel Uday said, that we are collecting the Waldenstrom macroglobulinemia, and I'm happy to say that at least the next IMAGE conference is in PGI from 12th to 14th of February, not in January. It is in the month of February. So people can prepare your abstracts and other things. These abstracts would also be useful for the IMS Congress, which is going to held in the last week of September of 2027. So in 2027, there is a myeloma bonanza, first in the form of Indian Myeloma Group meeting, the IMAGE meeting in the month of February at PGI Chandigarh, and the second, the International Myeloma Society meeting in Delhi in the last week of September. So with that, happy reading about myeloma, and thank you all who have joined this, especially Dr. Reena Nair, Dr. Raja, Dr. Ritu Gupta, Dr. Aniket, and all the executive members, Dr. Hari Menon, Dr. Joseph John, and rest of the people. Thank you very much, and see you on 28th of May. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, sir.
Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you.